we should start. May I start by saying, on behalf of Doughty Street Chambers, we offer a very warm welcome to all of you to this memorial celebration, to celebrate the truly extraordinary life and achievements of our dear friend and colleague, John Jones QC. It's hard to believe it's already been 5 years since he passed away, but the memories of his extraordinary accomplishments and contribution to making our world a better place still carry on to this day. May we ask you all to join us in offering an especially warm welcome to the members of John's family who are with us today, his wife Miša and his sons Patrick and Zachary, John's parents Peggy and Hugh, and his sister Anne, and John's nephews and niece Julia and Maceo, and of course all of John's extended family who are joining us from around the world today. We would have, of course, much preferred to have all been together in person today, but perhaps one of the pluses of holding this memorial via Zoom is that it allows many from around the world who perhaps wouldn't have been able to travel to join us and share their experiences of working with John. Such as the far reach of his extraordinary achievements, they really do span and travel the world. We have a large number of John's friends and colleagues who will speak this evening, but we will start with a short poem read by John's mother, Peggy, who wrote a book of poems for John after he passed away. May I please therefore hand over to Peggy, and a very warm welcome to you.
Okay, good. These are lines. They're not really a poem. They're lines that I wrote in Kew Gardens many years ago. So I'll just read them. I felt as I looked at the pond, or saw the pond, how everything passes, moves and passes. Life is just this wind, this light, never still, always changing. Of course, there will be terrible loss, but it is just the wind and the light passing, moving, alive. This is life, alive, moving, and everything passing, always, and arising.
Thank you very much, Peggy, and so lovely to see you and Hugh, and for joining us this evening. It's great to see you, and look forward to seeing you in person very soon. May I please now introduce Edward Fitzgerald QC, who's the joint head of Doughty Street Chambers, who worked closely with John on many, many cases over the years. Edward, may I please hand over to you?
Oh yes, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, family and friends of John. It's 5 years, as Steve said, since we lost John, but he's still vivid in our memories and still greatly missed by all of us in Doughty Street, by all his colleagues at the bar in England, and by his colleagues throughout the world. And I think you know that the Defence Extradition Lawyers Federation set up a special John Jones Memorial Essay Prize, and you're going to hear, I think, from one of the winners this evening. And we always try to set an essay title that commemorates his work in the field of human rights and extradition. Truly, John left an indelible print on what Geoffrey has described as the global struggle for justice. I myself remember John as a self-deprecating but heroic figure He was a modern-day Odysseus, much travelled and resourceful, with eloquence, wit, and humanity, an insatiable curiosity for other cultures, and a delight in foreign languages, of which he spoke many: French, Bosnian, Swahili, and I think Pidgin Sierra Leone also. Like Odysseus, he could outwit all the monsters of the modern world: the Cyclops, the Scyllas, and the Charybdises, the torturers and the tyrants. And I remember traveling out with John to Singapore to defend a 19-year-old drug courier sentenced to death, Yong V. Kong. And John was absolutely indefatigable by day and by night. And eventually, after many trials and tribulations, Yong V. Kong was spared the death penalty. But afterwards, of course, John insisted that we went to the all-night zoo and entertained us with his knowledge of all the many nocturnal species represented there, the leopards and the owls, the lemurs, and all the rest of them. And that perhaps incarnated both his commitment to justice and his joie de vivre, his insatiable curiosity. The other lovable feature of John was his great loyalty to the clients whom he championed. I'm thinking just briefly of Andrew Simiou, the Anglo-Greek wrongly accused of manslaughter in Greece and sought for extradition from England. I remember working with John on that case. And although, again, we lost at the start, he was vindicated in the end. And John stayed in touch with the family ever after, right until Andrew was vindicated and acquitted in Greece. And that was typical of John's staying power and enduring loyalty. And then, of course, there was Julian Assange, and John represented him with Geoffrey and Jen in the original extradition proceedings, and then always visited him in the embassy, and then won that case for him in the UN Working Party. And again, Julian Assange remembers him with great fondness and great gratitude for his work and his dedication to him. So let's all raise a glass to him later tonight. He was a great lawyer, a great champion of the oppressed, and a really great human being. I think his inspiration will live on for all of us. Wherever the wig is worn, wherever the robes are worn, wherever the cause of justice is under threat, there, I think the spirit of John will live on and be an inspiration to us, both in his humor and humanity, his brilliance, and his great sense of life. And his so let us remember all those great qualities of his. I pass on back to Steve.
Edward, thank you very much for those lovely and very warm words and wonderful memories of John. Can we move on now to David Talbert, who I'm sure for many of you will not need an introduction. He's a giant in the field of international criminal law, who was there right at the very start of the new era of international criminal justice, and worked with John in those very early years in setting up the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So if I may please hand over to David and a welcome.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Stephen, and the organizers for this opportunity to say a few words about my friend, John Jones. We first met in the early days of the Yugoslavia Tribunal, or the ICTY, when much of the building was an insurance company. But my wife and I immediately hit it off with John and became very good friends along with others. He was working with Nino Qc, who was the president of the court of the ICTY, and Nino relied heavily on John's work. But in a sense, we all relied on John in the office or out of the office for a good argument, a pint or two, maybe a few more than two. I was younger then, and for good fun. John was a fan of Monty Python, and he was an extraordinary mimic. We worked very hard, and John was usually the brightest light, both at work and at play. We had many good times. It was an almost magical time in one sense, as we were involved in this groundbreaking enterprise of the Yugoslavia Tribunal. We were dealing with the first international tribunal since Nuremberg. We were dealing with the most grisly of crimes at the same time. Nonetheless, somehow, John was able to bring great intelligence and humor to every conversation. Later, though, when I was deputy prosecutor, it was not so much fun to watch John, as a defense counsel, run circles around some of our prosecutors. John was clearly a very talented lawyer, and his early departure from this realm continues to be a tremendous loss to me, to his friends, to the community, and to the legal profession. The loss of John is still a shock these many years later, but John left a rich legacy both inside and outside the courtroom. After his death, when I was president of ICTJ in New York, I was approached about hosting a discussion in memory of John in our offices. And we were joined by the American part of his family. However, this event focused on John's groundbreaking work on the Hero and Namba genocide during the early part of the 20th century, and then Southwest Africa, now Namibia. John had worked hard to bring these terrible crimes to light. He did much of the work on his own, and the descendants of the survivors acknowledged John's great work in this discussion. He had taken on this project without any fanfare, had done an excellent job of documenting these crimes from a century ago, and had a strategy to get the evidence before the Permanent Court of Arbitration. It was typical John. Hard work, creativity, thinking out of the box, dogged pursuit of the facts, and a new way of looking at a difficult problem. While John left us entirely too soon, much too early, his spirit, his work, his life, his humor stays with me and with many others, as this event and the continued impact of his work and his life continues to show in our lives and in our work. Thank you so much for this opportunity to say a few words about John.
And thank you so much, David, for joining us and for sharing those wonderful memories of John. May I now please move on to Professor Paula Gator, who is a Professor of International Law at the Graduate Institute of International Law and Development Studies. She, together with John, was one of the first legal officers working with Professor Qc, who was the first president of the ICTY. Paula, may I please hand over to you?
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to give me this opportunity to speak a few words about John. I know many years have passed, but still John is very much in my heart and in my thoughts. I have to tell you that since I'm working little by little on the archives of Antonio Qc, I often find documents, papers, notes by John to Qc, and I immediately recognize his handwriting. And this is very nice from one hand, because I feel to be having them close to me still, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to do this work. That's why it's progressing slowly. Anyway, I wanted to say a few words about when I first met John. I met John at dinner at Nino Cassese house many years ago in The Hague. Nino used to invite the legal assistants to his place to have fun, to have a dinner together. And I immediately noticed that John was just the kind of person that, although you may not be very close to him as a friend, he was not a close friend of mine, you feel friendship nonetheless, because he was a kind and nice man, always laughing, always telling jokes, and it was really a great colleague. So we worked together at the tribunal on a few cases, and I remember vividly one morning, on a Saturday morning in The Hague, we were working at my place, having breakfast, and we were working on the Erdemovich case. And this was a case that then led Professor Cassese to write an important dissenting opinion on whether duress may be a defense for the war crimes of killing innocent civilians. I don't want to bother you with the details of the case, but I can tell you that John is the real author of the dissent of Cassese, because while eating a croissant, he said, well, but this guy, if he had obeyed the order and would have resisted to the threat to his life in order not to participate to the killing, he would have died anyway. So what was the purpose of not obeying the orders and resisting duress? So from this very simple sentence, he then passed the idea on Professor Cassese, and he developed, as I said, with the help of John and myself, this very strong dissenting opinion. So actually he's the author of this dissent. Then another vivid memory I have of John is one night in Paris. I was in Paris, he was working in Paris at the time, and we went to dinner together. And he had said to me that he had become a vegetarian. But when it was the moment to order dinner, he ordered a pork. And I said, but John, you told me that you were vegetarian. And then he made a funny face and he said, well, but in this case, the pork was wild. So I'm not vegetarian if the animal has been chased by the hunter. And he made a funny face and imitated the hunter hunting the prey. So this is what John was, a man who was always making things, laughing and having taking the funniest part of life. Then the last time I saw him was again linked to Cassese. He participated in the tribute to Antonio Cassese in The Hague. He wanted to come to say a few words. And of course, also on that occasion, and I've sent the link to Stephen of the ceremony. Also on that occasion, he made us laugh because he told us jokes about him and Cassese and the close friendship they had together. So also on that opportunity, he transformed a heavy situation in a moment to cheer us up in an intelligent way, as he was an intelligent man, thinking out of the boxes, as David has said all the times. Before a few months before he passed away, we were thinking of preparing a second edition together with his wife Miša, a second edition of the commentary of the Rome Statute. The Cassese, Gaeta, Jones. We were caressing this idea, we were making plans, and it's a pity that we didn't have the opportunity to complete this project. But in this way, he would be staying for us, at least for his great contribution to international criminal law, with his writings in these cases and his sweet heart. He would be always with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paola, for reminding us of John's great contribution to international law, but also, as you put it so beautifully, his very sweet heart. I was going to hand over to Nico Figa-Talamanca. I'm not sure if Nico is here. I haven't seen him. Nico, if you are, can you send me a message in the private chat? In the meantime, I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Professor Salvatore Zappala. another professor of international law at the University of Catania, who, like Paula, worked closely with John in those early days at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and Professor Qc. Salvatore, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. Good evening to all, and thank you for allowing me to be with you today and share a few memories, a few words about John. I am here because I was so lucky as to share part of the road with an extraordinary person, John R.W.D. Jones, my friend John. There are encounters that are true blessings. And my moments with John are moments like these, which I will always keep dear in my heart. We met in 1995, 26 years ago. And maybe it's because we were all younger. Maybe it's because it is that part of life where creativity is a must, where you cannot be but creative. But meeting John was already a rising star in the ICTY. He was the right hand of Professor Qc. Paola, I, Nico were the Italian gang, and there was a sort of automatic relationship in a way because of his very close link with Nino. Nino would then become my mentor. I met him at the ICTY, and actually John was part of the facilitation in my meeting with Nino Qc, because he was so kind as to involve me in informal occasions, beers, dinners, with a generosity which I don't think I've ever experienced after that, with a great generosity with young people whom he didn't basically know, because a few hours after he met me, he invited me to go to his place. And a few months later, when I came back to work at the ICTY more properly after my internship, which is when I met with him, he allowed me to stay at his apartment because I was homeless and poor and had no place where to go. And John was going away for the weekend. He was always in movement, John. He was always going somewhere or planning to go somewhere, running here and there, making an impersonation, telling a joke, having a brilliant idea, and 2 hours after, you would already have a fully fledged memo of 14 pages with footnotes, basically already completed. He would say, you do that, I do this, and you were starting to do your part when John was already there with his printed copy. And actually, the first typescript of International Criminal Practice with a green cover, Stephen would probably remember it, he made it in a matter of weeks. It was a brilliant idea and it materialized immediately. Then it became a book and published by an important publisher, but it was John shooting from the hip in a matter of days. And so that weekend, he told me, well, you could say, of course, at my place, the only thing, you would have to take care of my cat. John, one-eyed black cat, and of course we remember their cat was important and very dear to him. But the condition was take good care of my cat. I'm not sure the cat reported positively, but John continued to be a friend and to allow me to be his friend. Everything which has been said, and I'm sure everything that will be said afterwards, speaks to his curiosity, his generosity, his dignity, his intelligence. He was really a Leonardian figure. He was an eclectic intelligence. He knew a little bit of this and that, languages. He knew about history, no mystery. He knew about animals in the zoo in Singapore. He knew about everything, and actually he was able to relate with almost anyone. He was able to find a connection point. I remember his impersonation of the Padrino, Andolini, Questo è per te. And I mean, I can't say how even if then after our 2-3 years of common life, because in the Hague, as David Talbert was mentioning, we were living full days from 8 o'clock to midnight, basically all living together, having dinner together, spending weekends together. And a great deal of that was work. The objective was to transform a paper tiger into a reality, an actual reality. And John was a great part of that. I mean, life is about the difference you make. It's about the relationships you create. It's about the inspiration you are for all the people you are able to meet or who know of you. I think John accomplished all these. And as I wrote in my tribute to him in our journal, the Journal of International Criminal Justice, John was always very fast. And fast he was this time as well, but he will be forever in our hearts and in our memories. And thank you again for allowing me to be with you tonight. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Salvatore, for reminding us of John R.W.D. Jones's incredible generosity, but also the incredible speed and energy with which he carried out his work and other things. So thank you, Salvatore. May we now move on, please, to Vaspia Videvich, who is one of Bosnia's preeminent international criminal lawyers, who, together with John, defended Nasser Oric at the ICTY and secured his acquittal in a momentous case. Vaspia, thank you for joining us, and may I please hand over to you.
I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for inviting me. I want to greet all participants of this memorial and, of course, friends and family of my dearest John. I will not talk about John's contribution to the development of international humanitarian law, nor his contribution to the development of the ICTY itself. This is something that no one will ever be able to deny. Also, no one can ever dispute his brilliant defenses with great results. I want to say a few words about him as a man with whom I worked closely for 12 years in the defense of 3 difficult cases at the ICTY and other cases I worked on outside the tribunal. I want to express my deepest respect for him and share the joy with you all by having him as a friend. On the hardest time, in the tough defense cases I was working on, when I didn't know which path to take, I talked to John. He was always there helping, moreover caring and giving his best to help me no matter what. Simply, we were on the same path of defending this franchise, disenfranchised. Now, when I feel myself in dilemma about my next step in difficult cases, I think about what John would do in this situation, in that situation. He had an extremely strong sense of justice, rarely seen. He understood the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina and made an immeasurable contribution to the truth about the events that occurred in my country. I will always be grateful for that, as well as the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Srebrenica especially. I will never forget that when I took over the defense of Srebrenica's commander, Nasser Oric, John left the position as a registrar of the International Court and joined me in the defense of Srebrenica's commander. We spent months visiting villages of Podrinje, which was not easy back then to find the best evidence possible. He was a man whom everyone respected, and that is why no one from international organization or embassies refused to testify in our cases, and we had the results. It was really rare privilege, and it was rare privilege that I had to work with such person. He will be forever missed for me. thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Vaspia, and thank you for reminding us of John's commitment to justice, and justice in particular, the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and his commitment and drive for pursuing truth in all situations. May I please now introduce someone who needs no introduction, Sir Howard Morrison QC, a former judge of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where he sat on the Karadzic trial, and who recently stepped down as the United Kingdom judge at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. But before taking judicial office, Sir Howard appeared in many cases at both the ICTY and at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and in that capacity obviously worked closely with John on numerous occasions. So if I may please hand over to Sir Howard.
Thanks very much for those kind words, Stephen, and thanks for inviting me to participate. It's commonplace and to a degree inevitable that most people, when referring to one who has passed from this mystery to the next, use the past tense to describe and recall them. But within that lies a slight confusion, as others have touched upon, in a common theme tonight. John did not simply occupy the temporal space he lightened for far too short a compass, but he used that time not simply to generate what we consider memories, but of course to craft a quite incredible legacy, possibly the most outstanding legacy that will be crafted in international criminal and humanitarian law for many, many years to come. And legacies might come from the temporal past, but by definition, they flow into the present and thus the future. In that, John is timeless. And as lawyers, we know the legacy to be quite extraordinarily brilliant. So that's the man, kind and considerate, hugely intelligent and industrious. And that's the legacy, industrious and unique. He was extraordinarily kind and helpful to me on several occasions when I had what I thought was an intractable and insoluble problem. I passed it by him. He sat there and he let his mind sort of flow over the problem into all the nooks and crannies and came out with the right answer. And you thought to yourself, why didn't I think of that? To which the obvious answer was, because we're not as smart as he was. The enduring legacy isn't simply one that helped us and helped the people who followed us, but it's going to help lawyers yet unborn. And that is something. And I sometimes think what a judge he would have made if he had taken that route. Impeccably bright, impeccably fair, and a very decent human being. The qualities you want in a judge. So we're all proud to have known him and learned from him. Knowledge thus past makes us still know him today and ensures that we will know him tomorrow and beyond. So we miss him, but we know he endures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard, for reminding us of John's extraordinary legacy and contribution to the field of international criminal justice. You are quite right. He will live on through his extraordinary work and through the development and ongoing delivery of justice by the international criminal tribunals around the world. So thank you for reminding us of that. And thank you for joining us today, Howard. May I please move on to Professor Mark Weller, a professor of international law at Cambridge University and an associate at Doughty Street Chambers. While a professor of international law, he was one of John's first pupils when he was called to the bar and when John was practicing at Doughty Street. So may I please hand over to Mark, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I think we have already noticed the strand in what everybody has been saying. And that is really that our life is to a significant extent determined by the kind of people we encounter during our journey. And there are some who have more of an impact than others. And John is one of those who had an immediate impact, who would draw you into a circle of friends. And as we see here today, a very large circle of friends. But of course, I started in my relationship with him as a colleague and indeed as a student, as his pupil. He would never tire to elevate himself in front of his lordship, this or that, by saying in court, and by the way, I have the pleasure of introducing you to my assistant and pupil, Professor Mark Weller of the University of Cambridge, who is the director of the Lauterbach Center for International Law. And he would do it with a smirk and a smile, which I think was an example of his self-deprecating humor. And the one thing that he was lacking amongst those who are affiliated with Doughty Street, it is not surprising that it is lacking, but amongst other brilliant lawyers, we would normally expect them, because they're brilliant, to be sufficiently arrogant to measure up, as it were, to what they can achieve through their intellect in court and elsewhere. And while he was of that highest caliber, he was entirely lacking in the arrogance one can sometimes see. And quite to the contrary, there was a deep sense of humanity, as we heard, a deep sense of justice, and a sense of principle. I shared with him experiences, as it were, slightly from the other side of the fence in relation to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I had served as counsel during the conflict there, working with the UN mission of Bosnia and being well aware of the horrors that were being committed there. I was very much involved with the case of Kosovo while it was ongoing. And so we had a common background on some cases that raised issues of principle and, of course, major issues of humanitarian law. But obviously, while serving as his pupil assistant, I got to see him in other roles. I remember one case, which was not Assange, but it was an ordinary extradition case. And I was amazed to see the tenacity he showed in the defense of his client. When I went into the sitting behind him, I was pretty persuaded that it was a fairly hopeless case. But no, not to him. We worked extraordinarily hard. And through this route, if it didn't seem to please his lordship, the next one and another one, he would never stay sat down, but always come up with the next argument, the next idea, the next avenue. It was amazing to see how he was on the side of his client, really beyond the call of duty. It was a vocation for him, and he succeeded brilliantly well. Obviously, he exhibited razor-sharp logic in what he was saying, made great arguments. We heard earlier that he ran rings around the prosecution and other settings. But really what impressed me was the tenacity with which he pursued the argument. And they weren't always popular arguments. I think in one instance, we were looking at terrorism issues, which not too many people would have been happy to touch. But to him, it was an issue that required the very same intensity of application as any other matter. We had a number of examples where he had clients which some would have thought were somewhat controversial, but he was a man of principle. everyone is entitled to the best possible defense. And he really gave everything in pursuit of procedural justice in these kind of instances. So I learned a great deal by seeing what actually a practicing barrister, me coming from an academic background, can achieve, can do, and how enthusiasm, application, and brilliance can actually change people's lives in these real life cases to which I became more exposed due to his work. So to me, yes, I am one of those who were touched and to some extent elevated by knowing him as a colleague and over time as a friend. So I am particularly pleased to see everyone here who I think has similar sentiments, and we'll hear, I think, a few more of those in the similar vein. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for reminding us not only of John's brilliance, but also how he combined that with both humanity and with humility, such a rare combination in these days. So thank you for reminding us of that. May I please introduce another of John's former pupils, Graham Hall, who is a member of Doughty Street Chambers and a specialist in extradition. Graham, may I please hand over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Stephen. For those who aren't aware, I was John Jones's pupil from 2012 to 2013. I think I may have been his first pupil. And during the course of that time, John took silk, a correlation I took great delight in pointing out to him. But being John's pupil, I worked closely with him then and afterwards. And I think that there were two things that struck me generally in relation to John, primarily his wit and also his generosity. And in contrast to many members at the bar, John was an individual who would always ask how you were. And in even sharper contrast to the bar, he was actually interested in the answers that you were giving. And that was an incredibly refreshing approach, I found. And given the early stage at which I was, it was an incredibly reassuring situation to find yourself in, to have a pupil master who was willing to listen to you and be there for you. And I thought that I would share one story with you, which is that as I was getting on my feet, John had obviously scoured the secondhand bookshops, or more likely Amazon, and he bought me this book called The Famous Trials of Marshall Hall by Edward Marjoribanks. And Marshall Hall was a barrister who practiced, I think, from about the 1880s to the 1920s. His speeches and his cross-examinations regularly featured in the press. And this is a collection of his most famous trials. And John wrote a little missive in there. It's dated the 18th of April, 2013. So just as I was about to get on my feet. And it reads, "To another famous barrister called Hall." So you can see his capacity for generosity in there. He writes, "It was a joy having you as a pupil. May this book be your lodestar in your second six." And then he's got a little quote there from one of Marshall Hall's trials, which says, "Look at her, members of the jury. God never gave her a chance. Won't you?" And then John's written classic and very effective at Uxbridge Max. And I think to me that really encapsulates John. He was considerate. He went out of his way to make you feel valued. He always had a sense of fun about him. And to me, he was a mentor and a friend. And in my view, a true gentleman of the bar. And I really think that if we all tried to be a little bit more like John Jones in our everyday practice, the bar and the law more generally would be a noticeably more pleasant place. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Graham, and thank you for putting it so beautifully. John really was a true gentleman of the bar, so thank you for that. May I please now introduce another of John's pupils, I think his third and final pupil, Sanj Krishnan. Sanj, may I please hand over to you?
Thank you so much, Stephen, for this chance to talk about John. Only John Jones could explain the sometimes tenuous ambit of joint criminal enterprise using the song, "I Danced with a Man Who Danced with a Girl Who Danced with the Prince of Wales." Because he was a sharp legal mind, but he was also hilarious, and he really engaged with the world, be it on profound issues of justice or Larry David's travails on Curb Your Enthusiasm. John interviewed me for Doughty Street, so you might say he gave me my big break. During my time there, he came to me with really cool cases, and what's more, he trusted me with it. When someone you respect and admire really believes in you, I can't overstate just how precious that is. John believed in me as a barrister, but also as an artist. When I decided to pursue my dream of screenwriting, he was one of my most vocal supporters. He instantly thought about how he could help me, who he could connect me with, and he introduced me to his cousin Will, who's been a great friend to me over the years. John also gave me research work, which was a lifeline during lean times. In 2015, John asked if I wanted to help him write memoirs of his international work. I was totally honored. We sat down and I interviewed John over a few hours. What came through was John's very strong sense of justice, his wit, and his deeply human understanding of all the situations he worked on. The project fell on the back burner, but we were in touch in early 2016 about picking it up. I'd still like to find a way to share John's story. I think about John a lot, and his loss really breaks my heart. But he lives on in the lives that he enriched. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "To know that even one life has breathed a little easier because you lived, that is to have succeeded." John did that in spades for his clients. And we are all so much richer for knowing this delightful, warm, decent human being. John was and always will be my hero. Peggy, Hugh, Anne, Miša, Patrick, Zachary, Will, lots of love to you all.
Thank you very much, Sanj, and thank you for reminding us, as so many people have said over the days and weeks and months and years since John passed away, that they think about John very often, and he does very much remain with all of us in our thoughts and in our memories, almost on a daily basis, and so many people have expressed that. So thank you for your very kind contribution. I was going to hand over now to Ibrahim Yilla, who was John's assistant when John was the first principal defender of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. But I haven't seen Ibrahim with us. Ibrahim, if you're here, I don't want to miss you out, so please, can you message me in the private chat? In the meantime, may I please hand over to Ian Edwards, a barrister and one of the UK's most brilliant international criminal lawyers, who's at one Mitre Court buildings and who worked with John on a case at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. Ian, may I please hand over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen, and good evening to you all, family, friends of John. As Stephen said, it was my great privilege to work with John on his last, or certainly one of his last, international criminal cases. Along with Antoine Korkmaz, a lovely French Lebanese lawyer from Paris, we defended Mustafa Badreddin before the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. The client was charged initially with 3, but later 4 others, with the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon. It was a strange case, quite unlike any that he or I had ever been involved in before. For a start, we never met our client. This is because none of the accused were ever arrested. This was the first international criminal trial since Nuremberg in which the defendants were tried in their absence. So we never had instructions or much at all in the way of a positive defense case to advance. John and I spent many, many happy hours poring over the evidence, trying to work out how we could go about testing the prosecution's theory. It was tactically challenging, difficult work, but John's enthusiasm was as infectious as it was inspiring. He was forever coming up with brilliant ideas about how to deal with this or that piece of evidence. And I think John was the perfect fellow traveler on such a bizarre trial. As serious as the case was, he was acutely aware of some of the STL's fundamental absurdities. It was a long case, it was fantastically expensive. And as time passed, it became clear that its relevance to the vast majority of the Lebanese population reduced to almost nothing. And of course, the chances of any of the accused spending a minute in prison, even if convicted, were vanishingly slim. But while these absurdities may have caused lesser lawyers to have become disheartened, John's professionalism, his creativity, others have already spoken about how effortlessly he could think outside the box. And his sense of humor always helped to spur on the whole team and encouraged us to strive to do better. And despite some of the absurdities of the STL and the case that we were engaged on, John's compassion and humanity never allowed him to lose sight of the fact that the attack at the heart of the case resulted in dozens and dozens of victims. I remember him often talking about the impact such atrocities have on the lives of innocent men, women, and children. I always thought that he would have made a fabulous victims advocate in the international criminal sphere. So I'd end by saying that it was truly an honor to know John, to work with John, to count John as a friend. It's been said by others. I'm sure it'll be said again this evening, but we all still miss him enormously. And I think of him almost every day.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you for reminding us of John's incredible compassion and his ability to motivate his colleagues and get them moving. He was a brilliant leader of Doughty Street International and really made Doughty Street International what it is. And all of us at Doughty Street are incredibly grateful to John, and will always remember his brilliance in setting up our international arm of chambers. Ibrahim, I see that you are with us. Ibrahim Yilla is the principal defender, the current principal defender of the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone. He was one of the first public defenders in the defense unit, which John set up as the first principal defender of the Special Court back in 2003. Ibrahim, thank you very much for joining us, and may I please hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Let me start by thanking yourself, Stephen, and the organizers of this memorial. I have never actually had an opportunity since John's passing in 2016 to actually express on my personal behalf, my family and my office, our condolences to his family. May I take this opportunity of doing so now? We met John in 2003 when he was recruited by the then registrar of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, Robin Vincent, to help set up the defense of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, as it was known then. It was, I don't think much of the literature has actually reflected what John actually did in setting up the defense office. When John was recruited, the idea that was floated to him by the then registrar of that court was to just set up a defense office in a model that was similar to what was prevailing in the ad hoc tribunals in the Yugoslav and Rwanda tribunals, whereby they were essentially an extension of the registry and the inefficiency that accompanied that. The concept of the principal defender's office as a standalone entity within the court that was dedicated solely, it was the first organ, as far as I recall, that was dedicated solely to servicing the needs of the defense, that highlighted the significance of the role of the defense within the structure of all the tribunals prevailing at the time. The pilot of that project was John Jones. Immediately with John, I think it's in 2003 or 2005. It's published in the Journal of International Criminal Justice. The authors were myself, John Jones, Khadija Tujalo, and Claire Kaltilansis, the three public defenders that were supporting John. John, in addition to doing that, John is the person I credit with my introduction, as well as the introduction of several African colleagues of mine to the field of international criminal law. And for that, I remain eternally grateful. When we met John in 2003, he encouraged us to publish with him articles. He made time to give us tutorials on international criminal law. I mean, he guided our practice and procedure. So if to this day I could sit in the office of the principal defender of the residual special court for Sierra Leone, I'll be remiss in my duty if I do not acknowledge the role played by John in forging my professional career. If I say elaborate John's contributions and the anecdotes that I know of him, I'll spend the whole evening doing so. So let me cut it out at this stage and give opportunity to others to also point out what this great man, the contributions that this great man has made to their lives and to the field of international criminal law. Let me take this opportunity once again to express to the widow and John's children and his extended family my personal condolences and those of my family. Please take heart. John is always in our thoughts and in our prayers. And he's going to be for the grateful.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and I'll never forget how much John spoke so highly of you, Hadi and Claire, and all of those first principal defenders at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And I know he'll be so proud to see everything that you have all done since in the field of international criminal justice. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. May we move on from Lebanon via Sierra Leone to Michael Hertz, who is currently with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, but who worked with John on a case at the Cambodia Tribunal in Cambodia. Michael, thank you for joining us, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. John is perhaps less well known for his work at the Cambodia Tribunal than his other work, but this does not mean that his impact there is any less important. He was a hugely respected counsel at the ECCC, as it is known, assigned in 2014 as the international co-lawyer for Ms. Im Chem, who was his client and at the time a suspect before the court. Alongside the Cambodian co-lawyer, he led the legal team conducting her defense, and this team also includes Julianne Romy, attending today, and myself. John's ability to lead us so effectively was all the more extraordinary, given that much of the time he supervised us from 6 time zones away. He knew when to trust us to carry out the work ourselves, and he knew also when he needed to step in and guide us and support us. The distance did pose some challenges. We would call him up with an urgent issue when he was on a holiday. And one time he said, I need to speak to the judge about this, but I'm hiking in the Alps and I have about 30 minutes before I lose my signal, so it's now or never," which prompted Julian scrambling upstairs, phone in hand, to find our judge. But even in those situations, or when we could only speak to him briefly in between his court breaks at the STL on those busy days, he had a wisdom, a clarity, and the poise to calmly lead us through any situation, even though he was 6,000 miles away. As you all know, John had a terrific sense of humor, which was a source of great comfort to all those working for him. Even at times when the proceedings were particularly serious or heavy, any tension just fell away the moment John casually mentions that he commutes by skateboard to his office in The Hague. Or we would be on a mission in a remote part of Cambodia, and he would say, "First one to the car wins." Or we'd be in the hotel pool, where he challenged us sometimes to see who can hold their breath underwater the longest. He was playful, he was witty, he usually had an arcane idiom in response to any situation that we encountered. One of my personal favorites, when we had a submission I thought that was a surefire winner, he said, "Don't count your chickens yet, because there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip." I got an insight into John's humor when we were speaking about books we liked in Siem Reap in 2015 in a hotel bar. And he spoke enthusiastically about George MacDonald Fraser's The Flashman Papers. It's books full of mischievous humor about a fictional Victorian era British soldier who, despite having many character flaws, seems to unintentionally and comedically emerge from perilous situations as the brave hero. Putting the fictional character's flaws aside, in some small way, John was our flashman in Cambodia. We drew great strength from his ability to face adversity with courage and humor. And he reminded us with his playfulness the importance not to take ourselves too seriously, even when the work was solemn and grave. We miss these things about him more than ever in recent times, but we're lucky that we had the privilege to know him, to work with him, and to learn from him. And whenever we think about John, he continues to inspire us to this day. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for highlighting John's wisdom, which he combined with a mischievous humour, and for his joy of the Flashman series, which he introduced many of us to over the years. But not least, the enormous impact that John had on tribunals from as far afield as Cambodia, but to Sierra Leone and the Special Tribunal for Lebanon and all over the world. And in that vein, may I now introduce Sarah Bafferdel, who is a barrister, a brilliant barrister at 9 Bedford Row, who worked with John on the Gaddafi case at the International Criminal Court. Sarah, may I please hand over to you?
Thank you, Stephen, and for all of John's family for this important gathering. There are so many wonderful attributes that we can speak of in celebration and in honor of John's life, but the two that I want to touch on really is the humanity and the compassion which he brought to the field, particularly with regards to his peers and mentees like myself. So I first worked with John at a relatively early stage of my career in ICL, and I wasn't green, I knew who he was, and I was just completely in awe of what he'd already achieved and immensely grateful for the opportunity to work on Gaddafi and then fortunately on some other projects thereafter. And he took this role, he was lead counsel, and he took this supervisory role seriously, which was, you know, with his good humor, was rare, but not in any strict hierarchical sense, but rather this kind of collaborative, guiding and encouraging manner. You know, whatever the position you held in the team, he would make sure that you were kept in the loop and that you had the opportunity to contribute. And this was kind of sometimes enthralling, because John was one of these lawyers that always would want to push the limits. And, you know, with the Gaddafi case, we had so many new issues coming up before the ICC that he would always come at with a different perspective and force you to think outside the box. In particular, he was, and we've heard that he was, this sharp and formidable mind, and yet he never made you feel that your opinion was less worthy or unwanted. And in that sense, he really truly nurtured confidence in his team, in the Gaddafi team and other teams that I worked alongside him with. Part of this experience was really because John had this natural ease about him that that he was so approachable and charming all the time. And we've heard of all the anecdotes that he could come out with. And I'm surprised to hear that no one else has mentioned his Blackadder quotes that seemed appropriate at all times, whatever the audience and whatever the mood at the time. And it was all driven by this insatiable curiosity he had of the world. And as other people have mentioned, he traversed subjects from, you know, obscure references to Iron Maiden to American football, and then, you know, within a space of a lunch hour, you know, break. I remember one time, I wasn't even trying to catch him out, but we were on mission and I started talking about some castle in the middle of, you know, a desert in the Middle East. And he just knew so much more already about the history and structure that, you know, you could just never get one past him at all. And in fact, I always used to think that if you had met John without having first read up on him, then you would not necessarily come away from that conversation knowing that he was an ICL or human rights lawyer. And that's quite an achievement in this field. And really shows that his curiosity only nourished and furthered his brilliance. And really tied to these qualities, one other thing I think that I would want to add is that he showed what it meant to lead from the trenches. You know, we're all accustomed to these, you know, frantic deadlines and late night working, but it's all the more tolerable when you know that you have lead counsel there with you, wherever in the world he was, taking on tasks, however little or deemed unworthy for such a great in the ICL world. And then within the, you know, next hour, you'd see him draft submissions with such eloquence and complexity, and then being caught with such great humor. These were all valuable lessons that I was very lucky to have witnessed firsthand. And I echo the other sentiments that he remains sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for speaking so incredibly warmly about John's humanity, his compassion, but as you so wonderfully put it, his incredible inclusiveness and how he welcomed all and every member of every team that he led and worked with. He was always a pleasure to work with, and thank you so much for highlighting your experiences of working with him. May I please now hand over to Dr. Gunel Matro, who is a judge at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers in The Hague, and also a member of Doughty Street International. He worked on numerous international criminal law cases with John over the years, including the important case of Palestine at the International Criminal Court. Gunel, may I please hand over to you?
Thank you, Stephen. I met John on a football pitch in 1998, and already back then he was somewhat of a legend, not for his football skills, I have to say, because he probably thought that the rules of rugby applied mutatis mutandis to football. So John's real talent was not football, it was really the law. And his talent was not just about the knowledge of the law, which was very rich, not just the practice of the law, but really his passion for it. And that was this rare contribution, this rare combination, between knowledge, excellency in advocacy, and a passion for the law that made John a very special lawyer and a very special human being. He was one you wanted to have on your side in a fight. And as Stephen mentioned, I was blessed enough to have John in my corner to get General Gotovina and Markac acquitted, to help our invisible clients from the Lebanon tribunal. But also there's one adventure that he took us on that maybe reflects better than all others how important and how selfless a man John was. And that adventure is Palestine. The Palestinian quest for justice before the ICC was started under the captaincy of John almost 7 years ago now. And just a month ago, on 3rd of March 2021, the prosecutor of the ICC announced that she was opening an investigation into crimes committed in that country. The first thought that John's whole team had was for the Palestinian victims who might finally see a bit of justice before the ICC. The second thought that we had was for John, because he worked harder than anyone else for this day to arrive. And one day, a Palestinian victim who was expelled from her home or maimed by a shell might get justice before the ICC. She might not even know of John, but we, his friends and colleagues, will know that a few years earlier, it was he who started it all, and it was he who made it possible for her to receive justice, selfless as always. So thank you, John. Thank you for taking us on that ride with you, and thank you for your passion that still resonates with all of us today.
Thank you very much, Ganel, and thank you for reminding us of John's selflessness, but also his passion for the law. And as you put it so nicely, he really was a legend and will always be a legend in the field of international criminal justice. May I now please turn to someone who really does need no introduction, Karim Khan, Queen's Counsel, who is the, as I'm sure you all know, the incoming prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, and our warm congratulations to him on his election, who joins us this evening, and we're very grateful for that, from northern Iraq, where he's leading an investigation into the crimes of ISIS and others. Karim, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, Karim worked with John over many years in the field of international criminal law since they met, I think, in 1997. Karim, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for the invitation. And really a torrent of thoughts have been going through my mind as I've heard other colleagues and friends speak. And in fact, Stephen, since you were kind enough to give me the invitation, John can't be compartmentalized. He was really a fully rounded individual in every sense of the word. And I don't know why, but for some reason, a bumper sticker kept coming to my mind. And I think bumper stickers perhaps get a bad rap. And the bumper sticker that comes to my mind is one that I saw years ago, which said something like, it's not the years of your life that count, but the life in your years. And I think from what we've heard already, it's clear by any benchmark, by any parameter, that John lived a very full life. His contribution, his impact, the life that he led had such meaning that it puts many probably that have lived longer and many that may live twice as long to shame in terms of what is achieved and the relationships that he built. My own recollection of John, it's in so many different forms, but I think the first recollection, it was regarding football, and I didn't play. I played rugby, and I think the football, I heard that the five-a-side that took place at the ICTY that Ganel referred to was far too brutal. But he was speaking to Rod Dixon, an English barrister that many of you will know. And I happened in this quiet, in the place in the ICTY where we're having coffee. And he was doing these amazing impersonations of some of the people that were playing the game. And I then heard about a very peculiar passion for also West Ham. John was a great impersonator. When Stephen asked her to say something uplifting and some jokes, I can laugh with the best of them, but I'm terrible at telling jokes. And one of the many things I'm really envious of John, he had an ability. He was a great raconteur. Desmond De Silva comes to mind always, to me anyway. But John could tell jokes in an amazingly witty but also relevant way, but not just tell jokes, but do so in a way that brought to life the characters by way of impersonations. And I remember once, I think I was with you, Stephen, and Rod at Miša and John's house. I don't know where it was, I can't remember. I knew it was close to where I think David Palin lived, because John used to do some impersonations that were absolutely priceless. I think, it can be a cliche, but at least from those that I have the honor of meeting, John was the cleverest, brightest, most innovative lawyer from those of us that have practiced in international criminal law. I think his ability to be adroit, to be nimble in his thinking was really rather unique. He was extremely fast of thought, but also not somebody that talked all the time. He was a man of action. some of us lawyers, we can be far too immersed in the academic side of the law, looking at complex points almost as a fetish, as opposed to realizing the law has to be here to serve humanity. It has to be here to serve a purpose that leads to the protection of rights, to the vindication of certain essential freedoms. And John, being a great lawyer, was not just an academic. Being exceptionally funny, he was also extremely deep, extremely thoughtful. And this is why I said earlier that he had this rounded, personality. He was, I think Paolo put it very nicely in my interactions with him, a man of perpetual motion. So I think a lot could be said. Sir Howard Morrison is right. He would have made a great judge. But I prefer myself not to look at what might have been, but to look at what was. And that is a life well lived, a life that was rich, and really the greatest testament for any of us, I think, because whether we live 100 years or we live a short life, I think we are gone in a blink of an eye, all of us. And the testament is actually not the publications that he made, great though they are. It is not the writings, the knowledge, the jokes that he told, funny though they were and wonderful they are to recall. It is the love that remains behind. So really for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Miša, Patrick and Zachary, I think you would have seen and heard already so many testaments from those that had the honor, like myself, of knowing John in part. I would have liked to know him better. That love and respect has been articulated, but you should know that love and that respect was well deserved. And you, the members of the family, should know that those of us that have known John, even though Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I haven't met you, and Patrick and Zachary, that love also extends to you. And I think that love of the friends of John is something that you should hold dear. It is meaningful, and I wish you the very best. And John, he is a wonderful presence, and he's a joy to remember. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kareem, really, and thank you for joining us and for reminding us and setting out so wonderfully and highlighting how John really was a man of action, as you put it, someone who did rather than spoke. He, as you said, achieved so much in the time that he was on this earth. And as you so rightfully reminded us, he has the enormous love and respect from all of us, and that will continue on. And we wish you, finally, wish you, Kareem, all the very best with your new role when you start at the International Criminal Court in June. May I now turn to Vera Padberg, who works with the Clooney Foundation for Justice, but before that was our head of the Doughty Street International Office in The Hague. And she, together with John, was instrumental in setting up Doughty Street International. And obviously in that role worked very closely with John for many years. So if I may, please hand over to Vera, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Stephen, and for allowing me to say a few words about John. The first time I met John was during my interview at Doughty Street in 2014. I was a 25-year-old recent law school graduate from the Netherlands, and I was very much impressed by the fact that there would be a Queen's Counsel present during my interview. But I soon found out that I did not need to worry about this, because the Queen's Counsel in question was this very friendly looking guy wearing jeans and a t-shirt who was making jokes throughout the entire interview. Of course, this was John, and my first impression of him was exactly right, namely of an incredibly friendly, funny, smart, and inspiring person who was at the same time very modest and down to earth. John has been such an inspiration during the 2 years that I worked with him at the Doughty Street International Office in The Hague, which he set up. I really admired him for his creativity in his work, his 100% commitment to his clients, and his incredible memory, as referred to by many of you already. But apart from being the best mentor I could have hoped for at the start of my career, these 2 years were filled with funny moments. way too much to mention, but it included John coming to the office on a tiny little skateboard that he had borrowed from his boys, with 2 large bundles of court documents under his arms, as also referred to by Michael. His habit of taking power naps in the middle of the office during the middle of the day with his feet on his desk. And John actually once making the Dutch newspapers for telling a particularly offensive joke to a Dutch celebrity. But one nice story I wanted to share in a bit more detail was how at each lunch meeting we had at the restaurants close to the STL, and this was another great thing about John, he would always take time for a good lunch, no matter how busy he was. But at the end of each lunch meeting, he would ask for a decaf espresso. And at some point I asked him why, because well, decaf doesn't actually help you. And he didn't really seem to like it either. And indeed, he admitted that he did not like coffee, but he just ordered it for the little chocolate that came with it. Apparently the waitress had overheard us speak, because when we left the restaurant, she shoved 2 hands full of chocolates into his arms so that he would never have to order a decaf espresso anymore. Well, I will leave it here. So many more stories to tell, but it has been a real great pleasure to hear all of your memories of John. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am for John's friendship, his professional mentorship, and of course for the friendship with Miša over the past 5 years as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera, and thank you for all you did with John in setting up Doughty Street International and making it what it is today. But also thank you for reminding us of John's not only brilliance, but how he combined that with being incredibly modest and incredibly down to earth. May I please hand over from Vera from one to another modest and down to earth Queen's Counsel. A new Queen's Counsel was appointed this year, and that's Jamie Burton QC, who shared an office, I think, or at least had a room next to John in chambers at number 54 Doughty Street. So Jamie, may I please hand over to you?
Steve, thanks very much. Also to Hugh, Peggy, Miša, Patrick, Zachary. It genuinely is a real honour to have the chance to remember John in this way and reminisce about John. You know, it's clear from everybody's contributions so far just how much we will miss John and how much we really valued having John in our lives. As Stephen says, I'm not actually going to talk about John as the lawyer as such. I don't really know John as a lawyer. I mean, he was a lawyer and he was next door to me in the very insalubrious surroundings of 53 Doughty Street, top floor. And I, of course, knew about his reputation. Indeed, I used to tease him about it sometimes because he was well known as being one of the leading international lawyers of his generation. And I used to laugh and said, well, the pool's so small. I mean, that's hardly an accolade at all. But the reality was, you know, that was just a demonstration of what a pioneering and fearless lawyer he was, and equally a demonstration of just how green-eyed with envy I was of his reputation, which was absolutely fantastic. But I learned a lot from John, nevertheless, even outside of the legal context. I mean, if you've ever seen one of John's to-do lists, they are really a piece of fine art. I mean, you actually had to study geometry to actually work your way around them. Such were the angles and the Venn diagrams, etc. But it was a demonstration of the man himself. You know, he was just incredibly busy, incredibly industrious, involved in so many different things, and gave each of them, you know, his full self, in the same way that when he spoke to you, he gave him his full self to you. That's what made him such a charming and engaging man. And you know, other things as well. He was the most incredibly well-read person I think I've ever known. And John and I used to, you know, over a drink or over an email or a sort of bored moment around the water cooler, as it were, talk about what we were reading at that time, and we'd make recommendations to one another. And he would pretend that, you know, the sort of crass ones I'd recommended he had any interest in or hadn't read 20 years ago, and I pretended I had the intellectual capacity to read any of the things he suggested. Indeed, I checked for the purposes of this lovely moment this afternoon what the last sort of book he recommended to me was, and it was The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. And no, like you, I've never heard of that either. And I can't say I ever got round to reading it, but it gives you an indication of the sort of mind that we were dealing with. He was just so inquisitive, and he thought about everything. And he never spoke unless he thought about what he was going to say first. But that brilliant speed of thought still made him an incredibly engaging conversationalist, because there were very few pauses, even though he was thinking in that way. And as I think Mark said, you know, John was never ever arrogant. Yeah, I remember one time he was beating me badly at tennis, and despite his, you know, physical prowess, I mean, like most things about John, if you ever saw one of his thighs, it was literally twice the size of the average humans. But one thing I could sort of occasionally beat him at, or quite regularly actually, was tennis. But on this one occasion, he was giving me a really bad beating. And, you know, if I was better than him at tennis, I definitely wasn't a better loser than him. And I was, you know, expletives everywhere and really annoyed and, you know, huffing and puffing and everything. And one of the changeovers, he just sort of looked at me and sort of very innocently just said, Jamie, you don't seem to be really enjoying this very much. And I just remember thinking, you know, there wasn't an ounce of gloating in his voice. There wasn't any sort of sense of him saying, and I'm giving you a really good beating now. He was genuinely concerned I wasn't really enjoying the tennis, rather than being focused on the fact that he was winning. So, you know, and he was insanely kind to people. I mean, the saying goes that he would give you the shirt off his back, but John literally gave me the shoes off his feet twice when I didn't have smart enough shoes to go to an urgent court appearance I wasn't expecting to go to. I mean, one of the great benefits of sharing a room with him was that, you know, I could basically borrow all of his stuff. And indeed, from John came the idea of having the mid-afternoon nap and the eye patch, which he always had. He might not have liked coffee, by the way, but he didn't mind a single glass of champagne in the afternoon, but perhaps not everybody's aware of that. So, yeah, I mean, the one thing about John that can't be denied is he was a phenomenally hard worker. I mean, and being at close quarters with him, I really saw that all the time. And, you know, I thought I was quite a hard worker, but John really was incredibly hard. And I remember one really hot, sunny afternoon, when every sort of normal person was out enjoying the sun, etc. And I got an email from him saying, do you know where the hole punch is? And he was obviously in the office looking for the hole punch we shared and wondering where it was. So I wrote back this email going, yeah, it's under a tree in the nearby park. Go and find it and take your book and don't come back for a couple of hours. And it led to a sort of earnest conversation between the two of us about workloads and, you know, work-life balance and everything. And yeah, we were getting to the age where we had to start thinking about trying to stay fit and stuff. And he said, well, one of the things about, you know, his plan to work more abroad was that he thought he would work less. And I've absolutely no idea whether that turned out to be true. From everybody's contributions, I suspect that perhaps wasn't. And he continued to work just as hard. But it was a bit of a sadness for me because it meant that I saw much less of John in the last couple of years. Indeed, one of the last times I saw him was when he made an unexpected appearance at my 40th birthday party. And it wasn't unexpected because I hadn't invited him. I just thought, well, he's not going to make that, is he? I mean, he's not going to be able to come over. But he did, and he came in with Miša. I hope Miša remembers it, quite late on into the party. And I was told by a really good friend of mine later that the look on my face just said it all. It was as if my party had finally started. You know, I was just so happy to see John. And that's my sort of abiding memory of John. I just luxuriated in his company. I just enjoyed it so much in a completely, you know, unqualified way. It was just sheer joy. And that's what I remember about John. You know, I loved him. I really loved him. And I miss him terribly, as I'm sure we all do. But this has been a really nice opportunity just to share that and engage with that again. And so thanks again, Stephen, and thanks to the family for allowing us that opportunity.
No, thank you very much, Jamie, and thanks for reminding us not only of John's extraordinary kindness, which so many have spoken about this evening, but also how he really was the master of the to-do list and how he really did take to-do lists to the next level. And also, it sounds like that John introduced you, like he did so many of us, to the incredible importance of afternoon naps, which he was a real expert at as well. So thank you for those wonderful insights into John. Before coming on to our next speaker, can I just ask if Jen Robinson is here or if Jeffrey Robertson is here? If you are, can you please perhaps send me a message in the private chat so that I should know to come to you next. But now, may I please hand over to Alex Davidson, who did a mini pupillage with John when he was a student. And one thing about John, which is important to highlight, it was that there was such a large number of students who he helped along the way. He never said no to anyone who reached out to him for help or assistance, and asking for any kind of experience or insight. And in a nice way, we've come full circle, because Alex was the first winner, I think, of the extradition essay competition, which Ed referred to earlier. So Alex, may I please hand over to you?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Before I tell my story about John, I must promise you all from the outset that my story does get funnier. But unfortunately, you'll have to bear with me for a moment while I contextualize my relationship with him. So my mother died when I was very young, and I was eventually adopted. And when I had very little contact with my mother's family. I began to develop a relationship with my mother's siblings, so my uncles, when I turned about 18. So I was down in Cornwall visiting one of my uncles when I explained that I was currently studying law and interested, for better or for worse, in becoming a barrister. And he said that by coincidence, he went to school with someone who was now practicing as a barrister. And in fact, he was rather good at it because he'd just been made a QC. So this led me to meet John for the first time down in Cornwall, where I was also lucky enough to meet Miša and their two boys. And the first thing that John did to me when I met him was put a cold beer in my hand. And then he proceeded to absolutely thrash me at table tennis. He just absolutely annihilated me. And I only mention this because I fear that with all that's been said about his towering intellect, his humility, his kindness, not enough has been said about how good he was at table tennis as well as tennis. So Jamie, you and I have both fallen victim to John's wicked forehand. Anyway, so once the fun and games were out of the way, he began to give me hugely helpful career advice, which he did on many, many, many occasions. He also arranged, as was mentioned, for me to have a mini pupillage with him. That was at Westminster Magistrates Court. And what was the case, you ask? It was a Croatian extradition hearing involving allegations of war crimes. And this is where I will always have one small gripe with John. In many ways, he painted a rather unrealistic portrait of the bar for me. I returned to Westminster Magistrates Court for the first time only a couple of weeks ago, appearing in my own right as a pupil barrister, representing a man charged with shoplifting a coat from M&S. So not quite a war crime, but you have to start somewhere. And I hope one day I may, in some way, have half the career that he's had in international law and at the bar in general. So as I mentioned, John gave me so much career advice at countless junctures in my career. And I'm still trying to follow in his extradition footsteps now. As mentioned, winning the essay competition, which had his name on it, meant so much to me, the sentimental value, a win that I have to credit and dedicate to John himself for sparking my interest in extradition law all those years ago. So while I've only had the benefit of knowing John for 3 years, he's just had such a profound and lasting impact on me. So the last time I saw John was at a work event at the London Film Museum, and there was a James Bond exhibition. And I felt completely out of my depth, surrounded by terribly impressive people, a parallel I think I can quite fairly draw today as well. And I was trying to make myself scarce when out of nowhere came, "Hello, Alex." And just as the first time I met him, John was standing there, making sure that I had a beer in hand. And instead of networking with all the impressive people, he spent so much of the evening just telling me stories about my birth family, about my uncles, stories that I just never knew, about my birth mother as well. And that's how I'll always remember him, just so fun, so generous with his time, so humble, and such a great human being. And I'm pleased to say that on that last occasion when I saw him, I repaid the favour in kind by arming him with plenty of beers. Enough, in fact, for him to climb into the James Bond photo booth and pull his best James Bond impression. And I'm pleased today to share that with you as I've managed to trawl it up on my phone. So there you have John, after a few beers, pulling his best James Bond impression. And as I said, that's just how I'll always remember him. So fun and so generous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for talking of John's sense of fun and his generosity, but also highlighting how he helped so many junior members of the bar and international lawyers around the world to find their feet in our profession. Jeffrey Robertson QC is with us. Again, someone who needs no introduction. He's the joint head of Doughty Street Chambers, was the first president of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and in that role appointed John to be the first principal defender of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And of course, in later years worked with John in defending Julian Assange in the extradition proceedings. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us, and may I please hand over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. The bar can be a lonely and unforgiving place. It has a culture of cover-up of personal problems and a culture of not giving help to those suffering from them. In the case of barristers called upon to do atrocity law, there is a psychological toll that it takes. And John became the best defense counsel for the worst defendants. For his colleagues, his death 5 years ago was a matter of intense shock, the greatest shock we've had in 30 years here, and a matter, I think, of unfathomable pity. Well, it was at the Special Court of Sierra Leone that we first saw John's qualities. Robert and Vincent and I were aware that previous international courts, particularly Nuremberg, had never had a proper independent defense office of any kind of comparison to the prosecution office. So we decided to set up the office of principal defender, and we appointed John to that role. And he did it so well, with such independence and organizational ability, that the principal defender, or at least a powerful defense office, became compulsory for international courts that followed us. And it's typical of John that one of the last cases he did was on behalf of one of our principal defendant, Charles Taylor, languishing in a British prison, to try to get him transferred to Africa. Well, John had a photographic memory for every Monty Python and Blackadder script. In Sierra Leone, he learnt the local pidgin, and in a coastal town in Africa, he became acquainted with his Dr. Dolittle persona. He learnt a strange clicking language that enabled him to communicate with orangutans. And naturally, he became a member and an executive member, I think, of the Orangutan Protection Society. As far as whales were concerned, he fought for their right to mammalian life and their freedom to travel across the seas by taking cases against Japan. John's life, professional life, was devoted to those in peril in the courts. His advocacy was fluent and unflappable. His scholarship was profound, his ability to intellectualize what he was doing and pass it on to others. His example was inspirational, and his sense of humor was a joy. He represented some of the most demonized, and it must be said, some of the most demonic of defendants, ensuring that by that representation, justice on them would be seen to be done. So thanks, John, for all the memories, and thanks for our other speakers for reviving them tonight.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And as you so as you say, John's passing was a massive loss to all of us at Doughty Street Chambers. But thank you for also reminding us how blessed we all were to have had him as a colleague, a dear colleague, for the time that he was with us. So thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you to all our speakers tonight for sharing your memories of John with us. May I now please hand over to Miša, John's wife. But may I please first thank her and all of John's family for allowing us this evening to share our memories of John and remember all those amazing good times that we shared with John when he was with us. And on a personal note, may I also please thank you, Miša, for being such an incredible support to so many of us in the years since John has passed away. Thank you, Miša, and thank you to all the family. May I now please hand over to Miša.
Thank you so much for this amazing memorial. I've been watching here together with Patrick and Zachary, who've been attentively listening to all these wonderful contributions. Patrick and Zachary, come here to say hi. 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 Thank you so much for reminding us of all the funny things that John did, all the to-do list, his ability to do impressions, different local UK accents, his pretty nerdy book choices. When, on holidays, one's supposed to relax, he was reading all these super complex evolution books. His power naps, holding breath under the waters, skateboarding on little penny boards and so on. So thank you so much for, bringing these wonder memories to us. So I'd like to thank also everyone who took time to join us today to remember John and to acknowledge his contribution and achievements. There's so much more to say about John, and I'm sure many more would like to speak, but hopefully there will be other opportunities in the future. What this event has shown us is that we have been blessed with having so many wonderful friends, colleagues, and family members. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has helped us over the past years and for being there for us. Your support, no matter how significant, has made a great, great difference, and we will always be grateful for that. I'd like to particularly thank Doughty Street Chambers and all the colleagues there. I mean, what an impressive group of people with outstanding expertise and very big hearts. John often said that he felt at home there and he was very proud to be part of it. So my special thanks goes to Steve for organizing this memorial and for being such a wonderful friend, always checking in with us and making sure that John is not forgotten. John truly was a giant, but not just because of his intellect, his talents and his achievements, but as many of you remarked today, most importantly because of his kindness, generosity, modesty, and appreciation for everything and for everyone. Thank you for celebrating his life with us today, for lightening up this anniversary, and for keeping his spirit alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miša, for those lovely words. And may I say on behalf of all of us at Doughty Street that the little that we've done over the years since John's passing is a mark of the enormous love and respect that we had both for John and for all of you. So again, our sincere thanks for allowing us to share our memories of John with you all and with each other this evening. It seems right, after all we've heard about John and about his brilliance, that the only befitting way to end this memorial this evening is by handing over to John himself. And I'm very grateful to Vera for a video that she's put together of John's highlights of John appearing in court. It's a good night from all of us, and thank you all very much for joining us. And it's now over to John. But just finally, before that, may I say a big thank you to Ben Ray, and to Richard for your help in organising this evening. We couldn't have done it without you. So thank you very much, and over to John, and look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, no, Mr. Jones.
Yes, well, Your Honour, firstly, I think, particularly since we're not sure yet whether the 65 TERG conference will be public or not, we need today to be able to expound our grave concerns that our client's prospects of a fair trial are rapidly vanishing over the horizon with the present directions for the defence case. Certainly, while we stated that we may present no evidence, because well, if I may present a metaphor which occurred to me in this context, litigation is often compared to a tennis match, and this is currently second week of Wimbledon.
Yeah.
That if one had a match in which prosecution is presented with a brand new racket, and we're presented with a racket with a few strings which have been snipped and half a shaft, and told go ahead and play, who would play under those circumstances? Those watching the trial or the match are not going to see that we've got half a racket. They're just going to see us losing. And another analogy, it's as if one had a budget of $100 for rackets, and $80 goes to the prosecution, $20 to us. That's the 8 months and the 2 months. Who would play under those circumstances? And so when we say that we may not call evidence, we mean that it's not, in our view, better to have 10 witnesses or 20 witnesses than no witnesses. It may be better at that point to bring no evidence whatsoever, but certainly it's not a position that we would withdraw. We're not going to leave our client high and dry under any circumstances. So I want that to be clear.
I am sure of that. I mean, even if I were told, or I was told yesterday that at the end, during an apocalyptic sort of fit, you said you might even consider withdrawing completely from the case. I know who I am dealing with. So I know your great sense of responsibility, Mr. Jones.
So to start off with, I want to set out some very useful German word, leitmotifs. Certain leitmotifs which appear in the judgment, in the prosecution's arguments, because I think it's useful to look at some of these issues conceptually. And the first leitmotif is what I call daisy chain criminal liability. It's the liability where Orich is at best 3 or 4 steps removed from the actual perpetrators, and with the most attenuated forms of criminal liability in between. Not even aiding and abetting, but this aiding and abetting by pure omission. And without wishing to sound flippant, it's like the quaint Edwardian song, I danced with a man who danced with a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales. It can go on forever, this daisy chaining of liability, but ignores it when Orich says that Qc was appointed by the war presidency. So it's picking the plum and leaving the duff. That's thinly disguised strict liability. In fact, one of the best titles of a book I read was Thinly Disguised Autobiography, because in fact many books are thinly disguised autobiographies, and we say the title of this judgment should be Thinly Disguised Strict Liability. I've been told to slow down. I'm going as slowly as I can. Chamber. To make it clear.
I give the floor to the defense to present its case.
Thank you, Your Honour. And I'm sorry that you're hearing from me again rather than the dulcet tones of my lead counsel.
You will not be surprised if I tell you that we all would appreciate if you really could slow down a little bit, or if you speak that fast, make a break after each sentence.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I'll go very slowly. Raised by the prosecution of whether a superior, Orich in this case, can be held. My apologies. The interpreter suggested that electrodes should be attached to my feet to zap me every time I go too fast.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. You are already on your feet, and may we continue immediately. However, I think it would be assistance for both the judges, but primarily for the interpreters, if you could slow down a little bit. I know your heart is full, but nevertheless, it would be helpful if you could slow down.
Yes, I'm obliged, Your Honour. It's not the first time I've been told that I speak too fast.
Okay, thanks.
And the Chamber's argument. But it's circular because by definition, whenever a crime occurs, someone has failed to prevent it. Because if they had prevented it, it wouldn't have occurred. That's why it's circular. But you don't convict a man or uphold his conviction on the basis of circular reasoning like that. That Oritz or Kurdzic, some unknown MP member, must have failed to prevent the crimes because the crimes occurred. I don't know if Your Honour, Judge Haberdine had a question. No.
No, Mr. Jones, I was just enjoying your presentation.
Thank you. I'm very much obliged, Your Honour. As far as the references to the... Right. I'll take that as an indication that I have 2 minutes rather than anything else. The references to the transcripts.
This concludes the submissions of the parties on appeal. A judgment will be rendered in due course, and Mr. Jones, at that time, you will see who can interpret my signal for the 2 minutes as a sign of victory. But it's on truth and not on winning a case.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Your Honours, as everyone knows, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so we prepared a simple visual aid, which should be in front of you, to help in answering Your Honour's 4th question.
Are you sure you are really simplifying matters by this
Yes.
not exactly simple picture that you have produced?
Yes, well, I suppose I didn't want to blind you with science. However, at the same time, you'll see, I hope, as I go through it, that this does simplify things, in fact. And so it does lead to these absurd results that a missile which lands in a muddy swamp, lands in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a desert, is against a civilian target, because it's a negative definition. That's the problem. If it's not military, it must be civilian. A muddy swamp is not a civilian object. A desert is not a civilian object. And yet their rule obliges them to say that it is. And it's also, I don't want to be too using philosophical logic about this, but I was a PPist at university. I did philosophy at university. But there's a fallacy, a well-known fallacy, which is it's the fallacy of denying the antecedent. And it goes like this. You say if it's a cat, it's a mammal. You go, it's not a cat, therefore it's not a mammal. That's a fallacy, because it could be a dog, it could be a horse. And the same fallacy is here. They say if it's within 200 meters, it's aimed at the target. It's not within 200 meters, therefore it's not aimed at the target. Wrong. That's a straight logical fallacy.
Thank you again for joining us, and wishing you all a wonderful evening.